The Emergence of Kurdish Nationalism. Sheikh Ubaydallah and the Kurdish League. Sheikh Ubaydallah's rise to prominence marks the first stage of a greater consciousness of Kurdish nationalism. A sense of community had previously existed among the Kurds, but the Sheikh's open declaration that he wanted to create an independent Kurdistan distinguished his rule from that of his predecessors, such as Emir Badir Khan Beg of Botan, who had ruled over much of the same area in southeastern Turkey and northeastern Iraq from the 1820s to the 1840s, that later came under Sheikh Ubaydallah's jurisdiction. Since Ubaydallah's rule was characterized by nationalist goals and that of Badir Khan Beg was not, it is important to note some of the differences between their reigns. The most notable is their titles. Ubaydallah was a sheikh, a title designating his religious functions as head of the Naqshbandi order, tariqat. As sheikh, Ubaydallah exercised influence even in areas under the rule of other chieftains. Ubaydallah's position as a powerful sheikh allowed him to infuse religious phraseology full of millenarian and messianic symbols into his nationalist objectives, in a way that Badir Khan Beg as a non-religious leader was unable to do in spite of the fact that he was emir, prince, or paramount chieftain of a confederation of tribes. Some Kurdish nationalists are of the opinion that after the defeat of the Ottomans in 1839 by Ibrahim Pasha, son of Muhammad Ali of Egypt, Badir Khan started planning the establishment of an independent Kurdistan, but there is nothing in the historical record which indicates this. It seems what Badir Khan Beg desired was greater autonomy under Ottoman administration. It is possible that Badir Khan Beg's consolidation of power, and his wars against the Nestorian Christians in 1843 and 1846, which allowed the Ottomans to interfere in Kurdish affairs more than they had been able to do previously, also encouraged the Kurds to try to prevent such interference and manipulation in the future. The most important difference between Sheikh Ubaydallah's nationalist aims and the traditional, autonomy-minded Badir Khan Beg was his publicly stated goal of establishing an independent Kurdistan. In July 1880, Ubaydallah wrote the following letter to British Vice-Consul Clayton in Bashkali.
The Kurdish nation is a people apart. Their religion is different to that of others, and their laws and customs are distinct. They are known among all nations as mischievous and corrupt. The chiefs and rulers of Kurdistan, whether Turkish or Persian subjects, and the inhabitants of Kurdistan, the Christians, one and all are united and agreed that matters cannot be carried on this way with the two governments, and necessarily something must be done so that the European governments, having understood the matter, shall inquire into our state. We want our affairs to be in our hands. Otherwise the whole of Kurdistan will take the matter into their own hands, as they are unable to put up with these continued evil deeds, and the oppression which they suffer at the hands of the two governments of impure intentions.
Other than Sheikh Ubaydallah's self-proclaimed desire for independence, British consuls in the area thought he had a comprehensive plan for uniting all the Kurds in an independent state under himself. Wadi Jwaideh considers the rise of Sheikh Ubaydallah as the emergence of a new type of leadership among the Kurds. He was the first and probably the greatest of the religious secular leaders of Kurdistan. Ubaydallah's position as sheikh granted him the prestige held historically by sheikhs in Muslim society. A sheikh, simply by attaining the position, set himself apart as a leader of men as well as a servant of God. Besides piety, august morality, and an often charismatic personality, a sheikh also needed all the abilities of a modern politician. He had to be able to effect compromises, settle disputes, and provide succor in such a way that none of the aggrieved felt short-changed. Such acts of arbitration and conciliation were often best achieved by men of non-local origin, who had not participated in local feuds that would have been thought to have tainted their judgment. The sheikh's reputation was based on his family's saintly genealogy, sagacity, charisma, and non-local bloodlines. Sheikh Ubaydallah himself could claim descent from Sheikh Abdul Qadir Ul-Gaylan, the famous 13th-century saint from Baghdad. In Kurdistan, in particular, It was the role of the sheikh as a holy man that allowed him to become so powerful. Many of his illiterate and fanatically religious followers, murids, could readily see their sheikh as a Mahdi, Messiah, a savior come to bring justice and a better life. Such devotion and demands increased in times of social and political malaise and famine and economic hardship. Sheikh Ubaydallah's rise to power in the late 1870s and earlier 1880s, and that of Sheikh Said in the 1920s occurred in such circumstances. The sheikh was thought able to perform miracles through his special grace, keramet, which could persist after his death. This belief contributed greatly to the importance of worship at the tombs of dead sheikhs. The sheikhs also performed medicinal as well as psychic functions. In short, the sheikhs fulfilled the roles of doctor, lawyer, priest, and psychiatrist. While a sheikh or sheikhly family could rise to prominence by defending an exploited class or group such as the peasantry, this was only one way. Sheikh Ubaydallah gained great power because many tribal chiefs owed him allegiance through marriage, as followers, murids, or for services rendered. Some of the greatest tribal chieftains of the time addressed Sheikh Ubaydallah as Your Highness. A sheikh also consolidated his power through marriage to daughters of village authorities. By the time a sheikh and his progeny were able to contract daughters of tribal chieftains in marriage, he probably had achieved some wealth. This was necessary because a sheikh was expected to be generous and hospitable, depended upon for survival in times of need. He required money to attract and hold his followers. There was a direct relationship and reciprocity between the number of a sheikh's followers and the food, livestock, money, and land he received from them. In addition to this wealth acquired through gifts of all kinds and through marriage, sheikhs also had control over waqfs or pious foundations established to provide revenues for the upkeep of mosques, wells, and madrasas, religious schools. Many of the sheikhs treated the Waqf lands as their own properties. The Ottoman Land Code of 1858 also contributed to their wealth by increasing the amount of land they owned as individuals, along with agahs, large landowners, tribal chiefs and leaders, government officials, and rich merchants. Sheikhs were the chief beneficiaries of this land code by virtue of their increasingly dominant position in Kurdish society, after the crushing of the Emirates in the 1830s and 1840s. Granting land to sheikhs and tribal leaders after 1858 also served the political function of achieving the centralization of power that the Ottoman government desired in the latter half of the 19th century in eastern Anatolia and in Iraq. The suppression of the semi-independent Kurdish principalities by the Ottoman government, especially during the reign of Mahmud II, paved the way for the emergence of Sheikh Ubaydallah as a national leader. The disappearance of the emirs resulted in increased lawlessness and banditry that sometimes verged on anarchy. Released from the strictures placed upon them by the emirs, local petty chiefs pursued their own vendettas and feuds. In spite of its intentions, the Ottoman government was unable to centralize control. Encumbered by massive problems in western Anatolia as well as in its European and Arab provinces, and by increasing challenges and demands from European countries, the Ottomans simply could not fill the vacuum left by the disappearance of the emirs. Thus, the political as well as the religious situation was ripe for a shift of power to the sheikhs. Wadi Juwaidah has observed that the rise of the sheikhs to a position of national leadership among the Kurds does not merely indicate the great reverence in which the sheikhs were held on account of their religious character, it also indicates that, after the overthrow of the great princes, there was no secular person capable of commanding sufficient prestige among the people. The readiness with which the Kurds accepted the sheikhs as leaders shows the extent to which the Kurdish people felt the need for filling the power vacuum left by the disappearance of the emirs. The absence of some paramount figure undoubtedly seemed incongruous to the Kurds. A sociological view supports the conclusion that the reduction of the Kurdish emirates to smaller tribal units paved the way for sheikhly rule. For a period of 30 years or so after the destruction of the emirates, the Kurds, as Van Bruinissen suggests, were less integrated into a state, whether Kurdish or Ottoman, and less able to move toward a state structure of their own. Van Bruinissen believes the abolition of the Emirates did not mean greater direct, by which he seems to mean participatory, rule, and hence was a step backward in social evolution, away from the creation of a potential state. The proclivities toward tribal rule were still too strong to allow such a development. But it seems to the very lack of direct rule by the Kurdish emirs in the wake of the demise of the Emirates that allowed Sheikh Ubaydallah's independence movement based on the popular appeal of the religious brotherhoods, tariqats, to be realized. The Ottoman government, which had pursued an increasingly secular orientation throughout the 19th century that its successor, the Republic of Turkey, continued to pursue throughout the 20th century, with the exception of the two-decade rule of Abdulhamid II, fostered the type of nationalism led by religious leaders, which held sway from Sheikh Ubaydallah to Sheikh Said. While it was the suppression of the Emirates and its consequences that provided the context for the emergence of sheikhs as political leaders, it was the aftermath of the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878 that encouraged Ubaydallah to declare his nationalist program. The war had brought devastation, famine, and general hardship accompanied by disease, banditry, and violence. The peoples of the eastern provinces of the empire were in desperate straits. The precipitant cause of Ubaydallah's publicly declared independent Kurdish state was the Treaty of Berlin signed on 13 July, 1878 as a conclusion to the Russo-Turkish War. Article 61 stated that the Sublime Porte would undertake improvements and reforms demanded by local requirements in the provinces, and inhabited by the Armenians, and to guarantee their security against the Circassians and Kurds. The European powers were to oversee the implementation of the reforms. Juaideh states that fear of the Armenian ascendancy in Kurdistan appears to have been one of the most powerful reasons behind the Sheikh's attempt to unite the Kurds. Rumors were rife in eastern Anatolia that if an Armenian state were to be established, it would be in the same area or overlap the area where a Kurdish state would be established. Upon hearing of Article 61, Sheikh Ubaydallah is reported to have said,
"What is this I hear, that the Armenians are going to have an independent state in Van, and the Nestorians are going to hoist the British flag and declare themselves British subjects? I will never permit it, even if I have to arm the women."
From this point onward, Sheikh Ubaydallah seemed more than ever determined to resist reforms that would lead to the establishment of an Armenian state, and preempt a Kurdish state. His statement that he would arm the women, which he apparently made in earnest, is indicative that he was indeed a new kind of Kurdish leader. The arrival of British consuls in Kurdistan as stipulated by the Convention of Defensive Alliance of 4 June, 1878 to oversee the reforms exacerbated already intense Kurdish fears. These fears were not misplaced. Contemporaries, indeed, the consuls themselves, thought this would inaugurate the Protectorate of Asia Minor. The consuls were a beacon of hope to the oppressed and repressed Christians of eastern Turkey, encouraging them to crave for justice. In order to prevent the reforms that would allow more power and possibly independence for the Armenians and Nestorians, Sheikh Ubaydallah launched a sophisticated diplomatic strategy that included the creation of the Kurdish League, the first Kurdish alliance of its kind. Juaideh argues that one of the main reasons for the success of the short-lived Kurdish League was that it was supported by the Ottoman government, because of its resistance to reforms that would lead to loss of more Ottoman territory. Previous reforms throughout the 19th century had led to a steady erosion of Ottoman authority in its Balkan possessions and, as the Treaty of Berlin and the Cyprus Convention make clear, in Egypt. The Armenians were positive that the objective of the Kurdish League was to stifle the Armenian question by raising a new one, that of the Kurds. Even a rebellion against the government in 1879 did not deter Ottoman support for Ubaydallah and the Kurdish League's activities. After all, Sheikh Ubaydallah and his forces had been a significant aid to the Ottomans in their recently fought war, jihad, against the Russians. The Sheikh's forces still possessed the weapons, including Martini rifles, provided by the Ottomans for that endeavor. The Ottomans thought that the Kurds could be used to good advantage once again. In 1880, Ubaydallah invaded Iran to increase the territory under his authority. His Kurdish brethren lay just across the border. Iran was weak and the Iranians were Shi'is. Although the Ottomans supported the Kurdish League, it is possible that once Ubaydallah had consolidated his power in Iran, he planned to use his newly found power against the Ottoman government to facilitate the establishment of an independent Kurdistan. Ubaydallah's plans and dreams came to naught in Iran. His army was defeated soundly by the Iranians. Even the Ottomans took action against him upon his return, probably for two reasons. They were forced to do so by European public opinion, and they realized that support of Kurdish nationalism could easily get beyond their control. Ubaydallah was captured by Ottoman forces and taken to Istanbul in July 1881. After several months there, he escaped and made his way back to his hometown of Neri. But the European powers, still outraged by Ubaydallah's actions against the Christian Nestorians, prevailed upon the Porte to send a force against the Sheikh. Ubaydallah was captured and exiled to the Hijaz. He died in Mecca in 1883. Ubaydallah's invasion of Iran also made the Kurdish movement for independence an international issue, viewed unfavorably by the powers of the time and indicative of such future efforts. Russia did not want to be robbed of the territories, some of which were largely Kurdish, in eastern Turkey that it had obtained by the Treaty of Berlin. Neither did it want a Kurdish state on its Caucasian borders, especially one animated by the religious fervor of the Naqshbandi order. Russia had its fill of such movements with Shah Shamil in the 1840s, whose movement had been suppressed with great difficulty. Great Britain was opposed to Ubaydallah's movement because it did not want a situation that would draw Iran closer to Russia. Such a development would complicate its imperial policies in Central and Southwest Asia. The only large power in support of Ubaydallah was the Ottoman Empire, which wanted to use Ubaydallah's Kurdish League against the reforms, and hence the European powers, especially Great Britain and Russia. It also wanted to use the Kurds to stifle the Armenian independence movement. It is possible that the Ottoman government wanted to compensate for losses sustained in Europe by reconquering the Kurdish, Sunni regions of Iran and the Turkish-speaking, although Shiite regions of Azerbaijan. At the end of this first stage of Kurdish nationalism, all of the European powers, as emphasized in the Treaty of Berlin, were opposed to Kurdish independence movements. In addition, as indicated, Great Britain and Russia had their own reasons for opposing such movements. Only the Ottoman Empire had good reasons for supporting Kurdish independence movements, but not, of course, an independent Kurdish state.